The majority of my life, I like to think, is being built around truth or the search for truth or my curiosity about what the truth is. But for most people, probably including me, your personality wasn't built from the truth, but from protection. We didn't begin life as a personality. Maybe you and I did. We're definitely personalities.
A little extra pizzazz.
A little extra pizzazz. I had a friend one time who was like a drive time DJ on the radio back when radios were a big thing back in the 2000s. And I introduced him one time to somebody as a DJ. He was like, I'm not a DJ. I'm an on-air personality. And then the person asked me what I did, and I said, I'm an off-air personality. He didn't think that was nearly as funny as I did. But I still like to think of myself as an off-air personality. But you didn't begin life as a personality. You began life as a living sphere of energy, a 360-degree being of anger, joy, need, desire, sensitivity, power, and vulnerability. And that all existed without labels of being good or bad, that there was no identity around any of those. There was no concept of self. There was only the experience of life. And as you grew, your psyche and your nervous system began asking a single unconscious question. What do I need to do in order to be loved, safe, and connected? And to answer that question, you performed a radical and intelligent act of survival. And that act of survival became your ego, which we've discussed in other episodes, and it also became your shadow. And for this episode, we're going to introduce the shadow, and then we'll spend maybe about 10 more episodes discussing the different shadows that exist and how to deal with those. And whenever people come to breathwork and talk about shadow work, I feel like shadow work is a lot like sex in high school, in that a lot of people are talking about it, but almost nobody is actually doing it.
That is a great analogy.
At least that's what my high school experience was like. Great tales, very little evidence. So what is the shadow? The shadow was originally developed by Carl Jung, so it's part of Jungian psychology. And the shadow is everything that you learn to hide, deny, repress, or disown in order to be accepted, loved, and safe. It includes unacceptable traits such as anger, being needy, sexuality, vulnerability, wounded emotions such as shame, grief, fear, rage. And also it includes disowned strengths, confidence, leadership, creativity, visibility. I've talked about one of my shadows up until fairly recently was my propensity to be a silly goose. That was something that I tried to hide both from myself and from the world, that I'm not really that serious, and had to learn to get over that. The shadow isn't bad. Like a lot of times when people talk their shadow, they're like, ooh, shadow, bad. And it's like, your shadow is not inherently bad. It is an unfinished belonging. And the shadow is the person you would rather not be. And that was from Carl Jung. And one of the things that I like to say about the shadow is that your shadow is your gift is your shadow. That the very reason that people love you is the same reason that you annoy people. And a lot of times, if you could just take about 20% off the top, you'd be a lot less annoying to those who care for you and love you.
That hurts one of my feelings.
This is another one of those things you're like, I didn't realize I was coming here to be attacked today. Hold on. I have not yet begun to launch the assault.
Oh, good.
We don't even have tissues today. We have paper towels in preparation for this isn't going to be a crying fit. It's going to be a bloodbath.
It's good to have expectations.
Apparently, I've been on a tear for the last 4 days, just dropping truth bombs on people that they didn't want to hear.
Doesn't sound like you at all.
Yeah, why stop now? So ego versus the shadow. People talk about the ego. The ego gets primetime billing above the headline, gets all the press. The ego is who you learn to be to stay connected. And the shadow is who you learned not to be to stay connected. That anything that threatened belonging went underground and got hidden. And that our ego is our subjective identity. It navigates everyday reality. It makes decisions for us. It's a reinforcement of acceptable traits by the people who cared for us when we were younger. Your persona, we've talked about persona in the past, that it comes from the mask that Greek actors would wear during productions to let people know that they were changing characters. Many times it was like an Eddie Murphy movie where one person is going to play multiple characters. And rather than just putting on different outfits, they would just change masks, change their voice, and then they would be a different character in the narrative. And that is the persona. It is a social mask. It's an artificial identity for social congeniality. That what is it going to take for me to get along in the world? And its adaptations to society and family. What do I got to do? How do I have to show up so I can get along around here? The shadow is the warehouse of all the rejected material, the other within us, the fear of abandonment and social rejection. We realize we have to take these aspects of ourselves and hide that. And then you have your true self, which is your authentic, spontaneous core. It's a source of vitality and creativity. And it is your innate biological and psychic potential that we all have tendencies and propensities, and we show up differently. And a lot of that shows up as our true self. In breathwork, we use I am statements a lot to set our intentions. And the I am statements are how we create a self-identity. And as a child, people make I am this. I am pleasant. I am fun. I am joyful to be around. So when you do that, you have to, at the same time, conclude, I am not that. I am a happy person. I am not an angry person. That saying that I am one thing automatically precludes another thing from being true. And these rejected that's form the basis of the shadow. And that we have that binary black and white thinking as a natural feature of early childhood. And that children, it is childish to reject the complexity of the human potential and human life so that we can be able to manage that and to be compatible within our family system. As kids, our entire survival depends entirely on attachment. That any trait that threatens the bond between us and our family has to be suppressed because we do realize that we are in a very vulnerable state and that we are relying on others to take care of us. Suppressing those things that we can maintain that bond isn't a failure of development. It's the primary survival of logic of early life. And that through the emotional feedback that we get from our parents, brothers, sisters, whether they approve from us, whether they withdraw from us, whether they give us a positive face or a negative face or a stone face, our nervous system, this doesn't happen at a conscious level, but our nervous system learns what leads to connection and what leads to danger. And over time, this creates a sorting process. So we touched on a little bit that the ego contains all of the traits that are reinforced and safe and connecting and preserving, that it maintains attachment and belonging, that common traits are being helpful, calm, funny, smart, agreeable, independent. A lot of them are the positive traits. Negative traits can get in there as well, depending on what kind of family group and parents that we had, that we realize, hey, this is an acceptable way for our family and our social unit to deal with the world. And these traits become who I am, the socially conditioned personality, or the persona. The unacceptable becomes the shadow. The shadow contains the traits perceived as threats to belonging, protects you from rejection, shame, or punishment. At a very young that common traits are anger, grief, being needy, vulnerability, desire, disown strengths. That if you're too confident in your household, if you show up as a confident person, you might get rejected for that. That if you have leadership, if you have creativity, if you have visibility, if they outshine or destabilize the caregivers, your parents, they're going to give you negative feedback for that. Those traits still exist, but your awareness of them is shut down. This is what Robert Bly, the poet, calls the long draft. Words are hard. The long bag we drag behind us. Not because the traits disappeared, but because our consciousness of them disappeared and we just stuff them down and drag it around forever. The shadow isn't what you don't have, it's what you can't stay conscious of, that you no longer have any awareness of that. So what kind of home you were raised in shapes what kind of shadow you have. Jung has 12 shadows. We're going to talk about 10 saboteurs. That in performance-based homes that were about achievement becomes ego, and rest and softness becomes shadow. I was just talking to a friend that anytime everything is calm, he feels ill at ease, and he's from an achievement-based home. In emotionally unavailable homes, self-reliance becomes ego, and dependency is the shadow. Now I feel attacked. In strict houses, Authoritarian.
So many syllables.
Stupid speech impediment.
Whether your words want to cooperate with your brain.
No. In strict household, obedience is ego and rebellion becomes the shadow. And your shadow isn't about morality. It's a map of, again, what once threatened belonging. Now, one of the challenging things about your shadow work, is that you don't get to experience your shadow directly. You experience it as a projection, being easily triggered, strong reaction to others, repeating the same conflicts over and over again in different relationships, feeling out of character even though you're doing stuff that seems like it's what you should be doing. Don't feel comfortable doing that. Sabotaging intimacy or success. What irritates you in others is often something you haven't made peace with in yourself. Often, not always. The shadow in and of itself is morally neutral. It only becomes destructive when it is ignored or repressed. When it's unconscious, your shadow runs you. When it's conscious, the shadow can fuel you. Integrated shadows become emotional depth, authentic power, creativity, boundaries, compassion, and wholeness. Integration is not elimination, it is reunion. So integration, one of the things that I've talked about, in the shamanic world, shamans only do one of two things. They either reconnect you with energy that has been fractured and you're no longer connected to, or they remove energy that is attached to you that is not yours. So when we're doing integration, we are taking your energy that you've been cut off from and reconnecting you with that energy that's within you. And in Jungian integration, it's not about fixing the personality. It's about reuniting you with what was split so that you could survive. And when you stop fighting your own defenses and start witnessing it, the energy that was once used for repression is released. And a lot of what we do here is making the unconscious conscious. That's what awareness is, that we're taking things that we were previously unaware of, the blind spots, our shadow, and stop being run by survival logic and begin living your integrated gifts. So imagine that your psyche is a house where certain rooms are declared off limits to keep the structure standing. And shadow formation is locking those doors and hiding the keys. And integration is realizing the rooms were never dangerous, just full of stored energy waiting to be reclaimed.
That just blew my mind.
No?
Yeah. Integration is not elimination, it's reconciliation.
Correct. A lot of times when people come to breathwork, they're trying to eliminate their shadow.
That's where I was.
Which is understandable. And what they really want to eliminate is probably the behavioral outcome that comes from it being an unconscious. Like the behavioral outcome is definitely what needs to be eliminated. Hey, this is causing problems in my life of untold proportions and this needs to stop. And the only way they can think to stop it is we have to cut this off. Say, we don't need to cut it off. Like this is going to become your gift. Do you know what I just said previously was that like a lot of times we don't perceive our shadow directly, that it's an indirect experience of our shadow that leads us to it. And a lot of times because it is such an indirect experience that you finally have an aha moment about, I see it. I see the shadow. I got you. I understand you. And it is often tempting to think, I've had this insight. And now that I understand this, now that I've identified it, I'll be able to fix this. And that a lot in the psychologization of our society, that everybody has to have a word for you're presenting narcissism, which like less than 2% of the people have narcissism, but apparently every woman on earth has dated a narcissist. So those guys are out there doing the Lord's work.
Jesus.
And all the girls. Insight doesn't work because it's working on the wrong layer in your system. It's working with the wrong layer of your psyche when it comes to addressing the shadow, because the shadow lives below language. It's stored in your body. It's stored in your autonomic nervous system, breath patterns, your posture, your reflexes that you can't control, that you snap at things that other people don't. And it's why a lot of people can say, I understand where this comes from, but I still just react. They're not failing at growth. They're attempting a top-down solution to a bottom-up problem.
Makes a lot of sense.
So the shadow was formed before you had conscious thought. Insight works at the level of meaning And shadow formation took place at the level of survival. Most of it took place, almost all mindset development takes place before the age of 5. And many shadow patterns were formed often before 18 months, before language existed for you as a person, before memory was a narrative, before you knew what your identity was. At this point of human development, you're not recording stories, you're recording states. What is the state that I am in? And what your shadow is doing, or what your protective element is doing, is saying, if I express myself this way, is connection threatened? If I feel this way, is my safety in jeopardy? If I need this, does something bad happen? Someone who's younger than 18 months isn't forming beliefs to do this. They're reflexes to protect themselves. So when a shadow is triggered in adulthood, the body reacts first. Your heart rate shifts, your breath, your muscles tighten, your posture, your field of vision narrows. And only after you've had this reaction does your mind rush in to explain what happened. So that insight that we're talking about of, aha, it's arriving after the nervous system has already decided what's up, which is, I've told the story about after I started this healing journey, being in the Starbucks drive-through line, and the car in front of me is keeping one full car's distance between them and the car in front of them so nobody else can progress through the line. And in my mind, I'm telling myself, this is not a big deal. This is okay. But in my guts, it was like, this is an all-hands-on-deck emergency. We need to do something about this. There is a crisis in the world. And I had that moment of being able to sit there with myself and going, this really isn't that big a deal. Why is your nervous system completely on tilt about this? There's no great calamity in the world because you're going to have to wait an extra 30 seconds to order your coffee. And something in my shadow was being triggered that got there long before my mental processes got to show up and tell me this isn't a big deal.
Right.
Happy to say that now if that happened, I would be mildly annoyed at the person, but it wouldn't be a visceral triggering reaction of, oh no, the world's ending.
Look at that improvement.
Yes, I think being mildly annoyed is a completely appropriate response.
I would agree with that. Yeah, 100%.
When that shadow gets triggered, you're basically going into fight, flight, freeze, fawn. That's putting you into that survival state. And of all of those, I just had that realization that like fawning is one of those survival mechanisms. And of the three, it's the one I find most distasteful. But that's probably because I prefer fight. So once you go into survival mode, rational choice is reduced. Your perspective collapses. The people are trying to like, hey, there's another way to look at this. And you're like, no, there isn't. There's one way to look at this, which is I must flee. I must fight. I must do whatever it takes to make me feel safe. And whatever that old attachment strategy was that helped you get through that as a kid is what is going to dominate. And that is one of the reasons that you can tell someone, or someone can actually know mentally, I'm safe. And at the very same time, feel completely unsafe, that they feel exposed. Why they know that they're loved and that the people around them who love them, but can feel like they're going to be abandoned at any moment. Or, this is the one I'm going to feel attacked over, they know their reaction is going to be disproportionate to what has happened, but they're still unable to stop it, which can be quite annoying. So the body isn't in rebellion against your own thoughts. It's protecting you from a memory that was never verbal, that was never able to be expressed. So we've talked about before that the ego's job is not truth. Its job is predictability and control. And it maintains this repression through shallow and restricted breathing, constant mental narration, muscle armoring, hypervigilance, and self-monitoring. From the ego's perspective, the shadow is dangerous, not because it's bad, but because it threatens your belonging. And social rejection is still one of the greatest pains that we can feel as an adult. And that as a child before the age of 18, social rejection was actually dangerous. Like you needed to be accepted, you needed to be loved, you needed to be attached so that you could feel safe, so that you could be provided for. So when you start to have insights, when you start to have revelations and realizations about your shadow, the ego often responds with intellectualization. Hey, let's analyze this. It responds with spiritual bypass. I've already healed this. self-criticism. Why am I still like this? Endless reframing. What's the lesson here? They're just protective measures. And insight can actually become a defense, keeping experiences at a safe distance from the body, which is where it has to be felt. You have to embody it. And that's a lot of times why talking about your experiences isn't enough. You may tell your stories in therapy, in journaling, in relationships, in coaching, and yet the reaction still exists. And this is because the shadow isn't asking to be understood. It's asking to be felt without danger. And a lot of times you can't even talk about it because it happened at such an early age. You don't have an experience. You don't have a story. You don't have a reason like, hey, why am I like this? It happened when you were 6 months old. How would you possibly know why you are like this? That we all think, oh no, my life formed because of everything that I can remember, but it didn't. Your most formative experiences happened before you have any conscious memory of life. So talking about it or processing it verbally is keeping the experience in the past. And integration requires that your body experience it right now, that you are going to feel anger without abandonment, that you're going to feel grief without collapse, you're going to feel need without shame, and that you'll feel powerful without punishment. And until your nervous system in your body experiences now as different from then, the shadow is going to remain on guard. So that integration requires a state shift. It happens through a state change, that we're going to change the state in our body, that there are states and there are traits. Traits are characteristics of how we show up consistently across broad periods of time. States are emotional states. How do I feel in this moment? Am I happy? Am I sad? Am I up? Am I down? That we have that emotional state. So in order to process it, you have to be that you are turned on, that your nervous system is turned on, but at a tolerable level. I've been so gleefully happy sometimes that it's too much to bear. And that doesn't help you process anything. That you have to have that sense of emotion in a place where you can deal with it, and that you don't feel overwhelmed, and that you don't feel judged, and that your awareness can stay online without having to control or guide or confine the emotions, that you can just let them play out. And this is why integration is inherently somatic. It's inherently felt in the body. It doesn't integrate because you explain it to it and tell it a nice little story. It integrates it because your body learns that this sensation can move through me and I'm going to remain safe, connected, and intact. That this is a bottom-up, not top-down experience, that when you take it from top-down, it's insight, that you name the pattern, you map the logic, and that provides meaning for it, but that doesn't really do anything other than create a file folder, and then you put it back in the file cabinet and it stays there forever. But the somatic or visceral or embodied experience updates your reflex response, that it resolves that stored energy. That energy gets stored in your body, and it teaches safety at the level where the wound formed, where you originally got hurt. So integration happens when the body feels what you weren't allowed to feel before, that your breath can stay open, your awareness stays present, and that no corrective action, you don't have to do anything to correct it. You don't have to do anything to make it better. This isn't about emotional release or catharsis. It's about completing a circuit or completing a process and taking it all the way through to the end. And you don't stop reacting because you finally get it. You stop reacting because the body no longer needs to protect you from whatever it was that you were originally hurt by. So understanding is the map of the shadow. And much like maps are not the territory, maps give you an understanding of the territory. But breathwork is how you actually enter the territory. Conscious connected breathwork works because it directly modifies the conditions without forcing, without analysis, and without bypassing. So the ego helps maintain your shadow through patterns, that through maintaining that you have to be in survival mode all the time, that it restricts your breathing, that I certainly know I hold my breath when I'm at the emotional limits of my abilities, that I'll tend to hold my breath there. that we tend to breathe in our chest, up high in our chest, up high in our throat. A lot of people, when they talk, you'll hear them talk like this because they're doing that because all of that is coming from their neck because of all the stress of their ego, that they're putting it up there, that they have that chest dominant and throat dominant breathing and speaking, and that they use subtle pauses to regulate sensation. I wonder if that's why I do that. I don't think it is. My brain just works fine. So those patterns are not conscious. They're strategic. They function to limit how big our emotions get, that we're trying to keep our emotional range limited, and that by limiting our emotional range, that's what we've decided that we can handle, and that we interrupt feelings before they come to completion because we're worried that it will just never end, and that this moment of sadness is not going to be a moment of sadness. I'm just going to be sad forever and for all time, and it's never going to end. And it allows us to maintain narrative control. One of the humorous incidents for me, I was talking to a woman that we were doing a one-on-one breath work, and she was like, I'm a really happy person. And I had to bite my finger because I'm like, I'm pretty sure if we took a Facebook poll of your friends, none of them would come to that conclusion. Yeah. And that we're using that to prevent overwhelming sensations. So the ego is repressing the shadow mechanically, not intellectually. So approaching it intellectually isn't going to work. The integration also has to be mechanical and physical. So one of the beautiful things about breath work is that it's not there to attack the ego. It's just there to outpace it. It disrupts the ego's narrative control, that the ego survives by narrating, evaluating, predicting, and a continuous breath rhythm reduces that inner commentary. The most common experience people have when they come to breath work is that the inner commentary or the monkey mind goes quiet, and it's often been quite some time since that monkey mind has been on mute. It interrupts mental looping, and it shifts our focus away from the story of our life to the sensation of how we're living. Often, the other more humorous experiences I had at breathwork is a guy said, I didn't realize I had a headache until halfway through breathwork. And I was like, yes, you were deeply out of touch with the sensations of your body because of the story you're telling yourself. And as that story drops, the ego loses its primary leverage or its control. Not because it's defeated, but because it no longer has track. It softens the defensive armory that we have emotionally and mentally. That repression is held through muscle tone, posture, and subtle contraction. That a lot of what I see in people in poor posture is them defending something emotionally or mentally in their body. That as your breathing becomes connected, it increases the internal pressure for safety, that your safety goes up, and it gently challenges those holding patterns, and it brings awareness to the effort that has been invisible. I remember the first time that I truly relaxed my shoulders from breath work, and I was like, I wonder how long that's been like that. That may have been a couple decades. That it's not a collapse, and I don't even like to call it a controlled surrender, that it is an acceptance, that you are accepting life, that your system realizes it can allow sensations to happen without completely losing control. Breathwork creates a safe level of arousal. And when I'm talking about arousal here, it is that you are stimulated mentally and emotionally, that you have mental and emotional stimulation, but it's at a level that you can manage and that you can integrate it without feeling like it's just washing you away. This is a sweet spot where emotions can move, that you stay aware, and the nervous system doesn't hijack your experience. So the shadow came into existence because you were not safe. Not metaphorically, but you weren't safe if you expressed yourself. And conscious connected breathing directly updates this internal feeling of neuroception or the nervous system's unconscious assessment of safety or threat. And it does this by maintaining a steady rhythm during activation, that when you are stimulated, you're maintaining that rhythm, and it prevents collapsing or disassociating, and it's allowing intensity without consequence. That the body learns something new, I can feel this now and nothing bad is going to happen. That it is a cognitive reassurance with biological evidence. Okay. So because the shadow was formed before language, it does emerge as insights or words that when I was processing my shadow material when I first began this journey, I would go into full body contractures. When people are doing breath work, it can show up as heat, shaking, crying, tightness. It can be waves of emotion for which there are no stories. Like you just have this wave of sadness and there is no memory. There is nothing associated with it. And that's probably because it took place before the age of 5 and that there is no story to go with it. You just need to process that emotion and be done with it. Or you can experience a sudden stillness in which you just go completely. People have often said that they feel like they got buried in sand and that their body just couldn't move. And it doesn't have that story. This isn't a regression. It's a completion, that they are completing a circuit that never got to be finished when they were younger. And that by finishing the emotional arcs that are interrupted, that breath work allows that awareness to stay present while that arc completes. And the final ingredient to that is that breath work alone is not integration, that it's breath work plus witnessing. That breath work creates the conditions where the sensation arises, where the awareness stays kind, that no corrective action is taken, nothing is fixed, nothing is judged, nothing is expelled. The non-interference is what tells the nervous system the threat is over. That the shadow doesn't need permission to leave, it needs permission to stay without consequence. And that every shadow is time-bound, that it says back then this wasn't safe, and the breathwork's answer is now it is. Not with words, but with the experience itself. Which leads us to, you've had the insight of, I have a shadow. This is one of the things that is interfering with my well-being in life. And I've dealt with that. What are the outcomes that you'll get from working with your shadow? Because shadow integration, as we used to say in the South, it's no tickling contest. And that it's not about becoming calmer, nicer, or even more healed. It's about becoming less internally divided, more coherent with yourself. That I would say the most noticeable shift isn't even a reduction in emotional intensity. It's an effort reduction, that life requires less management and it just makes things easier. I think the big analogy that I always use for it is that it feels like I finally took the parking brake off in my life. That everything in my life before this, it just felt like the amount of effort that I was using to get the results, it seemed like I was using too much gas to get too little result. And if you've ever driven around with the parking brake on, you keep hitting the gas, you're like, why is this thing not going? And that was my life. That's how I felt. And so it has that reduction of effort. That once you've integrated your shadow, it will reduce reactivity or being triggered without having to suppress that you're still going to feel things. You're just going to stop being run by them. And that internal authority replaces self-criticism. That shame will loosen its grip. You're still going to evaluate yourself, but evaluation becomes informational, not punishing. You're going to increase your emotional capacity. That shadow integration doesn't make you fragile. It makes you more spacious and expansive. And it allows you to create capacity. The energy that you would have used in the past for coping, you're now going to use for capacity and for things that are more productive in life. It'll give you access to your disowned strengths. That a lot of what's locked up in your shadow isn't a negative, it's power that's been suppressed. And that once felt dangerous now becomes available. And that the energy, all of that energy that was used to maintain repression in the past becomes fuel for the things that you want to build in the future. You have a decreased need for control. That when your nervous system no longer thinks that there is a threat everywhere and that they need to manage life, to decrease those threats, that you're going to have less micromanaging, less overthinking, less people-pleasing, less avoidance disguised as independence. That action becomes simpler because it's no longer defending an identity. That you can have clearer boundaries without guilt. That your boundaries can arise organically instead of defensively. That you can say no without justification. You can say yes without resentment. and that you can have disagreements with people without collapsing or attacking them. It gives you more energy. That all of that integration, everything we've touched on, is that it is going to return energy to you. That repressing things is exhausting. I like to think of repression as like having a beach ball and then trying to hold it underwater all the time. It is a never-ending, difficult process. It takes a ton of energy and doesn't give you anything. That vigilance is costly. And yeah, it's not going to increase your energy levels per se, as it's just going to stop you from leaking energy. It's going to improve all the relationships in your life. Most conflicts in relations are shadow projection, that you begin to take things less personally, you project less onto others, you can stay present during emotionally charged conversations. This leads to fewer power struggles, more honesty, and a greater capacity for repair. That you can be consistent without force. That people who are integrated and coherent don't have to rely on motivation. They're relying on coherence. This is what is in harmony with me. This is what is attractive to me. I am drawn towards things. I'm not running away from things, which is one of the big differential motivators in life, in that when you are running away from something, you're going to run out of motivation. If you are losing weight because you hate being fat, at a certain point, you won't be that fat anymore and you'll never get to your ideal weight. That, all right, I don't look disgusting anymore. I can let off the diligence. I don't have to try so hard anymore. Whereas if you're being drawn towards something, I have an ideal in which I'm trying to live and how I would like to show up in the world because this is how I view myself. The closer you get to that, the more you're drawn towards it. And you have less of that vacillation and oscillation with your goals in life and your dreams and how you would like to show up, because that's who you are. A felt sense of wholeness. If you don't have that, life is tough. That if you just don't feel whole as you are right now in this moment. And this was one of the huge lies that people tell themselves who are dealing with their shadow and deal with their egos. If I felt whole, I wouldn't do anything. I wouldn't strive. I wouldn't try to get things done. And that is 100% not true. That the motivation of why you do things is different. So this isn't about even emotional or behavioral outcomes. This is existential. That you stop feeling like you need to manage yourself. You stop feeling like you've got to beat yourself with a stick to do things. That lack of internal fragmentation you don't have to have in a negotiation with yourself. That in the past, I would have really struggled to not eat because I like sweets. I think one of the things I've realized doing this work is that people who like salty foods tend to be very sweet people towards those around them. And that people who like sweet foods tend to be a little salty to the people around them. So they are looking, the internal monologue that they're dealing with, they're looking for a physiological relief from their own internal mental state. So that's probably why I rely on seeds. A little salty towards people sometimes. And once I've overcome that, I still enjoy the occasional snack, but I don't have to eat an entire sleeve of Oreos. Or, hey, I'm actually on a diet right now. I shouldn't be eating this. Let's negotiate with myself about what we can do with this or what we will not do that. That your ability to make commitments to yourself and stick to them is easier because that internal inner negotiation just isn't happening. And that it's less effort to just be, not because life is perfect, but because you're not divided against yourself. Things that shadow work is not going to do for you. You're not going to be permanently happy. You will not have emotional immunity. You will not have Superman levels of emotional bulletproofness. I wish I did. That doesn't happen. You won't be excused from pain. Things are still going to hurt. You will not have a perfected personality. You won't be constantly calm or live in a state of equanimity. That I think it'll give you something far more useful. It'll give you a system and a psyche that can feel, respond, and choose without collapsing or controlling. And that breathwork and shadow work doesn't make you better. It makes you whole. And not because you added something, but because what was split off finally came home. How you breathe is how you live. Take a big, deep breath.